All right, welcome back to the channel. We got another pay-per-view coming up this month between Gervonta Tank Davis and Leo Santa Cruz, and Floyd Mayweather Jr. in a press conference on the lead-in to that fight said something that was enlightening. He compared the fight between Gervonta Davis and Leo Santa Cruz to himself versus Arturo Gatti. Now, for the people that are not familiar with the Arturo Gatti versus Floyd Mayweather Jr. fight, it is the night that Floyd Mayweather Jr. became the man in boxing. But from the Leo Santa Cruz point of view, that is a terribly bad look. But is the reason that the fight is going to be like Gotti because of the ring legend that is Floyd Mayweather Jr., or because of the pay-per-view that surrounds it? Let's talk about that in this video. All right, welcome back to the channel. So Floyd Mayweather Jr. says that Gervonta Tank Davis versus Leo Santa Cruz can put Gervonta Davis into the same situation that Floyd Mayweather Jr.'s fight with Arturo Gatti, where that took Floyd Mayweather Jr. Now, if you're not familiar with who Arturo Gatti is, Arturo Gatti is a former 140-pound champion. I think he was a 147-pound champion, but he was just not a very good fighter. He was a very, very, very good fighter, but he was not legendary for his skill set in the ring. He had some back and forth wars with Mickey Ward, but in my opinion, Arturo Gatti is just kind of a fan favorite, right? Somebody that had a big name and who, by the way, was very big in Atlantic City, New Jersey, when there were fights being put on in Atlantic City, New Jersey, on a regular basis. But if you recall that fight, that is the fight where Floyd Mayweather Jr. was on his first pay-per-view. Now, when Floyd Mayweather Jr. is talking about this pay-per-view, he makes it sound as if he sold 500,000 pay-per-views on his first pay-per-view. That is not the case, okay? Floyd Mayweather Jr. was the opponent for Arturo Gatti. He was the opponent for Arturo Gatti. It may not seem now that we are, in the time where everybody thinks of Floyd Mayweather Jr. as Money Mayweather, thinks of Floyd Mayweather Jr. as the A side, the guy that gets to lay the terms down and all that. But that was not the case when he fought Arturo Gatti. And Arturo Gatti, it was the case where Arturo Gatti was getting older in his career. He didn't have very many fights left, but he did have a very marketable name for the wars that he had, for the fact that there are people running around. I know the Gatti list came after that, but he was a blood and guts warrior that a lot of people really liked because of, they do give you a lot of actions. Boxing can be really exciting when you don't duck and you don't move your head, right? Exciting for the fans, not exciting for you. However, you get my drift. Now, is this fight with Leo Santa Cruz similar to the fight with Arturo Gatti? In the pay-per-view sense, I do think that it is. And I agree that with Floyd Mayweather Jr., especially as we get further and further into this new model of pay-per-view, where the pay-per-view is going to be essentially responsible for the majority of the extra income that can be earned above the licensing fee that's paid by the network. So to a certain extent, I do believe that these pay-per-views will make 500,000, will get up to 500,000 pay-per-view buys. Because this level of fight with these level of fighters and these type of names, well, I guess I wouldn't say these level of fighters, but these level of names of fighters, people are going to want to see. And because boxing's a 200-year-old sport. It's not going anywhere. The only question is, how is boxing going to change, and what is it going to do, or what are the people inside the boxing world going to do to compensate for, changes in political changes, financial changes, right? Economic hard difficulties that affect everybody. So what you see with this pay-per-view is they're like, look, hey, we'll just charge money on pay-per-view, and if fighters want to see, if people want to see this fight, they'll pay for it. And the network is going to say, here's your X amount of dollars, the guaranteed amount of money, right, to pay whatever the guaranteed purses and all that. And above and beyond that, you're going to have to sell the fight. You're going to have to push the fight. But this is the perfect time for that to be the case because of social media. And that's something that Floyd Mayweather Jr. said during this, when he talked about whether or not Gervonta Davis and those guys could do 500,000 pay-per-views. He said, look, back when I started, we didn't have the social media. We don't have the social media outlets that we have now. I loved it when Floyd Mayweather Jr. said that because it's true. Number one, Floyd Mayweather Jr. got a whole bunch of social media outlets, okay? Now, they might not be wholly owned by Floyd Mayweather Jr., but they're a call away at any point in time that he wants to put a bunch of messages out about his fighters. And then when that flows, there's going to be a bunch of other people talking about it. So, yes, Gervonta Davis and fights like Gervonta Davis and Leo Santa Cruz are going to be able to get up to the 500, 600, 700,000 pay-per-view mark because that very well may be the only way that true hardcore boxing fans are going to be able to get those fights. So, yes, I do believe that this is very similar in a certain regard to Floyd Mayweather Jr.'s first pay-per-view fight, right? That did 500,000 with Arturo Gatti. But in this case, it's not Arturo. But in the case with Gervonta Davis, it's not Leo Santa Cruz overwhelming popularity, even though he is a very big name like Arturo Gatti, but he's not loved like Arturo Gatti, primarily because he ain't fighting nobody. Duck Gary Russell Jr., duck Guillermo Rigondeaux, ducked a whole bunch of people, dude, and Arturo Gatti ain't never had a reputation for ducking people. What he has stylistically similar to Arturo Gatti is that he's a pressure fighter, that he's going to keep coming, and then more than likely, Gervonta Davis is going to spin this dude's head around, man. So while I'm comparing, like, the pay-per-view circumstances are similar. In Floyd Mayweather's circumstances, he got the old guy that was willing to cash out, right? He got the cash out because there ain't no way Arturo Gatti thought he was going to win that fight, right? So it was a cash out fight for a popular fighter. And Floyd Mayweather Jr. dusts him off, takes his crowd, all the popularity that Arturo Gatti had, got turned into negativity towards Floyd Mayweather Jr. because they all couldn't stand the fact that Floyd beat him. But that hatred and his fan base catapulted him on to other things. Same thing could very well be the case with Gervonta Davis in this next fight. Now, skill-wise and what actually happens in the ring, that's the scary thing for Leo Santa Cruz. He better hope that it doesn't turn into a Floyd Mayweather Jr. versus Arturo Gatti fight. Because if it does, he's going to get massacred. Arturo Gatti versus Floyd Mayweather Jr. was one of the most ridiculous, one-sided massacres that I have seen. It was Pretty Boy Floyd at his absolute best in a ridiculous mismatch against a guy that for some reason people thought he had a chance to lose to. That could be the case with Leo Santa Cruz, but Leo Santa Cruz, I do believe, is a better fighter than Arturo Gatti is, even though he is a volume puncher, which against Tank Davis is dang near a sure way to get you knocked up out of here. But why are they doing it? Floyd is doing it, and that tells you I'm not going to say the genius of Floyd, because genius is when you create something, right? But I will say it is the fundamentally sound businessman and boxing entrepreneur that is Floyd Mayweather that would select this fight for Gervonta Davis. Don't let anybody confuse you. Leo Santa Cruz is not winning this fight. Leo Santa Cruz is not wearing Gervonta Davis down after 5 rounds like he's just going to be, and then he's just going to go away. No, that's not going to happen. No way, no how, because Gervonta Davis is a much better fighter than that. And Gervonta Davis is a much better fighter than Leo Santa Cruz. Now, and the last thing, I love how Gervonta Davis, Floyd Mayweather Jr., Leo Santa Cruz, all of these guys in their press conference talked about, after this fight is over, I deserve to be on the pound for pound list, because that is true. Leo Santa Cruz, if he beats Gervonta Davis and he has belted, even if it's a secondary belt at 130, 135, 130, 130, 126, and 122, and I think he was at 128. I mean, dude, yes, he ducked a bunch of dudes, but if he beats Gervonta Davis, how in the world couldn't you put him on a pound for pound list? You know he will be put on that pound list. Pound for pound list, he should be. Same thing with Gervonta Davis if he beats Leo Santa Cruz. But, that's for another conversation and way too much like right for ESPN and Ring Magazine and those guys, because those crew of journalists are just bought and paid for. But anyway, it is what it is. Literally bought and paid for because they work for the outlets. But anyway, it is what it is. And with that, I'm out. Peace.